realize we are not reading
like
from the same hymnal here.
These guys are in their 70s.
So they told me that they started arguing a lot more when Trump came on the political scene. Dick supported Trump. Emily furiously did not. But then, it was after Election Day in 2020 when they had one of their biggest disagreements.
From the beginning, I never believed that the election was fraudulently stolen. I have more faith in people and in our democracy. Dick
She sounds like she's
was
naive.
more open to doubt.
They were saying that there was a lot of things that were going on that shouldn't have been going on. There was packing drop boxes with ballots. One person would walk up to the ballot box and drop in all kinds of ballots into it.
So this particular theory Dick's talking about, it's from a movie, one of the many sources that he was turning to at the time. It's called 2,000 Mules. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. Yes, I've had people talk to me about it.
I can't hear you.
As I've been
That's
reporting,
not what
basically.
they said.
Yeah, so this movie, 2,000 Mules, it looks like a documentary, but it's really a propaganda film. It's about a stolen election theory. It's not true, but for a while on the right, this movie seemed like it was everywhere. Everyone seemed to be talking about it. Trump actually did a screening of it at Mar-a-Lago. It was in something like 400 movie theaters. I mean, lots and lots of people believed it. It's made by Dinesh D'Souza. He's a right-wing political commentator.
All right, what's the gist?
The gist is that it's about this theory that a bunch of Democratic groups were paying people, who they call mules, to illegally collect ballots and stuff them into ballot boxes in key swing states.
Philadelphia alone, we've identified more than 1,100 mules.
So there are these talking head interviews, and they're intercut with this grainy surveillance footage that shows like this person like putting ballots into a box, and they're like, see, there's all the evidence you need.
But that's not real surveillance footage, or?
It is real surveillance footage, but it's showing people just dropping off ballots legally. And when Dick watched it, like a lot of people, he thought it seemed really plausible.
It just added to the other stories that I was hearing, things that were happening in Arizona and Georgia. I'm thinking, yeah, there's stuff going on here that shouldn't be going on.
So Dick is watching this movie, he's reading his sources, and there are so many sources that cite so many stories about election fraud, which is part of what made it so believable.
And also, he's watching the President Trump, say over and over again that the election was fraudulent and had been stolen from him.
Yes, exactly. And then Emily's consuming all of her own sources, and they say the exact opposite. And it all added to this feeling that it wasn't safe for them to talk about politics. Did that feel different from other arguments or disagreements you'd had about non-political things over your marriage?
It did, because there was no give and take. We can argue about, what we're going to spend our money on. And we can argue about our kids. We can argue about the neighborhood. But we usually come to some sort of resolution. This whole thing about Trump, there's no resolution.
How did that feel?
Frustrating. Because I know my husband. I know what a smart, sensitive, thoughtful person he is. He's very generous. I know all that about him. And to have him suddenly be aligned to this person who I found absolutely despicable was very troubling.
She wouldn't talk to me. She basically just, I don't want to talk about it. I would try, but it wasn't going to happen. And if it did, we'd end up yelling at each other. I got so angry with her one day that I just had to walk out of the house and walk down the street to cool off. And then I started thinking, wow, I'm letting politics get involved in our marriage because I was really angry at the time. And I just couldn't stand that. I never thought that politics was important enough to jeopardize what she and I had together.
Did you feel like that it could do that politics could jeopardize it?
Yes, I really did. I think, what did I get myself into here? Maybe I did something I shouldn't have done.
What's the mistake you're talking about?
Having someone that was so far left that I couldn't live with.
Oof.
Wow.
Yeah, this was a pretty low point in their marriage, and they told me that they really wanted to find a way out of it.
We were both looking for some sort of, I don't want to say neutral, but impartial news source.
I was hungry for something that I could count on to peel the layers away and really show what's in the heart of it.
They started reading different online news sources that branded themselves as being unbiased, slant-free, that kind of thing.
Interesting.
And then they finally landed on something. It was a newsletter. Dick seemed to like it okay. So did Emily.
We both agreed, oh yes, let's read Tangle.
Tangle.
Yes, it's this daily newsletter, comes to your email. It's like a Substack type thing. It's run by a guy named Isaac Saul. He started it, he writes it. They have about 135,000 subscribers. It comes to your inbox every weekday, and each issue is all about one topic from the news. What they try to do is summarize 2 or 3 of the best articles and arguments from right-leaning sources about that topic, and then they do the same thing with left-leaning sources. And the whole premise of the newsletter is that there are people out there like Dick and Emily that are reading completely separate sources, and why not put all of those in one place so you can actually read what those arguments are?
I think probably the first thing that astounded me was
She
the
came to me before she
transparency.
jumped on the tree.
That when they make a mistake, they correct it as soon as they realize it, and they put it right up front.
How is that different than corrections in a newspaper?
A little bit, it's the way that they do it. So corrections in a newspaper, traditionally, they are at the end of the article. There'll be like a little footnote. Actually, we got this wrong. It's been changed above. We regret the error, in like little print italics at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Tangle's approach to corrections, it's a bit different.
Can you show me?
Yes. This is from August 21st.
I'll be back.
And at the very, very top, the very first thing that you see is correction, period, in big letters.
Mm-hmm.
In our coverage of the Medicare drug pricing negotiations yesterday, we said that 4 of the Medicare Part D drugs for which the government had negotiated lower prices were overprescribed in the United States. That was false. We misread the abstract of a study and rushed our review process when we included it. A sincere thank you to the 10 or so readers who caught the error. And then in italics right below that, this is our 114th correction in Tangle's 263-week history and our first correction since August 13th. We track corrections and place them at the top of the newsletter in an effort to maximize transparency with readers.
So this is different than a newspaper, I see.
Yeah.
What else did Dick and Emily notice about Tangle?
Yeah, so they noticed that it wasn't so sensational. It was more measured or even-handed in their language. So, for instance, Tangle noticed that readers on the right would sometimes unsubscribe from the newsletter after reading a phrase like undocumented immigrant. But they also didn't think it was right to call someone illegal or an illegal alien. So they did this big internal review, and they settled on the term unauthorized migrant.
We really liked that approach, trying to filter out all the trigger words or the words that were very highly volatile emotionally, which helps both of us then consider the issue with less emotion about it. I'm not going to say with no emotion. We would still argue, but with less emotion about it. And then we loved Isaac's take.
What's Isaac's take?
So Isaac's take, Isaac refers to Isaac Saul. He's the founder and writer of the newsletter. Mm-hmm. And at the end of every issue, he spends a long time writing his opinion. And these can be long. And he says exactly how he feels about the issue after having researched it, and just describes his own feeling about it.
Wait, do you have an example of this?
Yeah, here, I'll send one to you. We can look at it.
All right, this was earlier this month. Hurricane Helene and the disaster relief efforts.
Yes. The first part is just the topic. Then they summarize what the right is saying. They summarize what the left is saying. But then at the end, you see my take. And so I'm obviously not going to read this whole thing. It is...
Yeah, this is long. Wow.
2,200 words, I looked.
It's like a whole essay. But what's his take on Hurricane Helene?
Yeah, so before we get to his take, I think you need to understand what he's responding to here. There have been a lot of attacks on the Biden administration from the right, saying that they're doing nothing to help people who've been affected by this hurricane.
Like actually nothing.
Well, that they failed to rise to the occasion, basically. So Isaac, he really puts a stake in the ground and says there's a big problem with this narrative. It's all nonsense. It's all a lie. And then he writes, I hate writing pieces like this. It's not my job to defend the federal government from lies, and it's hard to write a piece like this without reading it like I'm openly shilling for Harris or Biden. I am not. I'm not here to do their PR or protect their reputations. However, I do care about our information ecosystem. I care about reliable, accurate information being shared widely. I also care about the North Carolinians in danger right now. Not just because they're Americans and it's a state I love, but also because my mom, my aunt, my brother and his family, my sister-in-law, and my niece, they all live in North Carolina. So the horrors we're all witnessing on the news hit close to home. Here's the truth, though. Biden and Harris have actually pulled every lever federal executives can in a situation like this. None of the critics that I posted above can say exactly what they want them to do that they aren't already doing. And if you're planning on writing in to tell me that I am shilling for Harris or being a left-wing hack by calling out lies online, you better be prepared to tell me exactly what I've gotten wrong here. And then he goes on for several more paragraphs.
Oh, wow. Interesting. I can feel his resentment at having to defend the Democratic administration.
Yeah, he's like, I don't want to do this just to defend them, but in this case, they're doing everything they can. And that's what the facts show. And so I'm going to say that.
Right.
And this part of the newsletter was something that Dick and Emily really came to appreciate.
He was very clear about what his biases were. That made him extremely trustworthy. More often than not, when we get to the end and we read my take, we look at each other and say, yeah, that's how I feel.
They started realizing that they actually agreed with each other on a lot of things, and they were able to talk about it. And eventually, something pretty remarkable happened. So remember how Dick was totally convinced the election had been stolen? He watched 2,000 Mules. He read all of those conspiracies about it.
Mm-hmm.
So as Dick and Emily were starting to have this shared understanding of the news again, Tangle did the thing for Dick that no other source seemed to be able to do, that Emily wasn't able to do. And that was prove to him that the 2020 election had not been stolen.
The only thing that changed my mind completely was the fact that I started reading Tangle. And it's only because I trust Isaac and his team so much.
It's incredibly fulfilling, to be honest.
This is Isaac Saul.
He's the guy who writes Tangle.
Yes.
Just like it's actually like so rewarding because the election fraud stuff in particular was one of the most difficult times of my life as a reporter. The month after that election was like dark, stressful, really, really hard work. And hearing that somebody had that reaction, that their mind was actually changed, even one person, it's like, yeah, it makes me want to cry.
So am I getting this right? It seems like Isaac and this newsletter Tangle, they seem to have done something that I feel like so many journalists, myself included, have been banging our heads against the wall, trying to figure out what to do, which is how do you get people to believe the evidence that the 2020 election was not stolen from Donald Trump? Something like a third of Americans believe it was. It's really threatening our ability to function. How do you present those facts and get people to believe them?
Yeah.
And you're saying Tangle did it.
In this case, Tangle did it. Yeah, for Dick, Tangle did it.
All right, so how did Tangle do this? How did Isaac, the guy who runs this, do this?
See that?
Yeah, so Isaac did a ton of work around this whole election denialism issue. It wasn't just one newsletter. Every time a new claim about how the election may have been stolen surfaced, he would spend all this time running it down, explaining in detail why it was false. He did that in the days and weeks immediately following the election. He continued doing it as new claims surfaced in the years since.
Come here, Kitty. A lot of news sources have done this. You know, looked at these different claims about how the election was stolen and showed why they aren't true, and the court cases where no evidence surfaced and all this stuff, right?
They did, but Isaac was doing a lot of research. Like, for example, in the weeks following the election, right after, he did this 400 tweet long thread that was going in detail into each claim. He was really, really deep on this. But I don't think it was only the research that helped convince Dick. There's something else that Isaac did, and it was in his tone and how he approached this whole issue, especially around the claims that seemed more persuasive. He didn't just write them off. He assessed them seriously,
Yeah, we've already had
presented them
a couple of
seriously,
frozen.
and that
Like
didn't
all the
make
water
Dick
outside's
frustrated.
frozen in the morning.
Here's Isaac.
So we gotta,
Some of the stuff was really convincing, and proving that they were wrong
I work in the
was
refrigerator
not as
all the
simple
time.
as saying like, oh, this is just like conspiracy nonsense. Like the ballot stuffing thing, that was a plausible way to steal an election.
In 2022, he actually dedicated an entire newsletter, a deep dive, into 2,000 Mules, that movie we were talking about.
So when that movie came out and everybody's just like, wow,
California
so
cars, yeah, we're like freaking.
watch it, and like take some of these allegations seriously and see what's up.
Yeah,
Turn out they're overlooked, but like
So that means
you
I
only
can
know
buy
that
my
if you
phone
actually
over there?
do some of the work.
It means
Can I
if you
just
have
read you
an
what we wrote
emergency,
at the
you
top
can
of
go
that
there.
newsletter?
Well,
If you're having a heart attack or
Is
something like
been
that,
there 3
at
years.
2,000 mules, the new stolen election theory.
I don't know.
And this is how he opens
What
it.
the hell? Do you
I consider
realize
myself
how
to be both a
I
skeptic
could do
and an
this?
open-minded person.
I
I
could
am
turn around,
deeply
I could take
cynical
this
about
to
our
the
government. Believe
the,
intelligence agencies
police
are covering
station
up the
down
truth about
I could tell
UFOs
what's going on.
and
I
don't
could tell
feel
by
any
getting
particular
through this
loyalty
survey.
to any
I could
major
actually see the
political parties.
hospital.
I
Well,
generally
if it were
distrust
me
authority,
and if I
government
didn't do it,
agencies,
I
and
would go to the
politicians.
police.
But I do believe it's wise
already
to
have.
consult expert
told you what
opinions
happened.
and advice. I love a good
That paperwork,
conspiracy, a good cover-up,
it's not-
and a great
it's not
story.
legal.
A
One
stolen
is
presidential
hysterical,
election would be an
I've seen it.
all-timer in every regard.
So
A
that's
story
the
so gigantic,
one they
a
screwed up the
conspiracy of
paperwork.
corruption and power so
Two,
unthinkable
they brought
that the
4
idea alone is
policemen.
tantalizing enough.
State
I almost
patrol,
want to
they
believe it.
brought everybody.
And then
Yeah,
it
so
goes on to
I asked him, I said,
point made in the film.
I asked him, I
Show
said,
why
is this a
it's
job
accurate.
interview?
That's how it starts.
Interesting. Okay, so that's the presentation
Yeah.
difference you're talking about.
If I really want to get
And
nasty, I'll just go
I'll just
ahead
say
and
that
call,
framing, it's
the
really
federal
different
government.
from how other outlets cover this
I'll call the
film.
White House.
Like,
Say,
for
hey,
example,
this is
there's
what
a
they
New
did
York
to me. I
Times
didn't do
headline
anything
about
wrong.
the
I didn't
movie.
even threaten
It
anybody.
was, quote,
I said I was
a
going to
big
sue
lie,
the
a new
hospital.
package. There was a Washington Post
Well,
headline
they
that was,
didn't
quote,
release
2,000
what was
mules
said
offers
or
the
what
least
happened.
convincing election fraud
All they
theory.
said was,
And look, I mean, that's all true.
That
It is a
also
lie.
is against the law.
But Isaac realized
You
he's
have to file a
probably
report,
not
you have
going
to
to
file a
convince
report.
someone who already believes
That's
the
an
lie by
report.
leading with that.
I
So
have
instead,
no
he
idea.
levels with that,
Well, you won't see
explains
me
where it's
every
coming
day,
from,
man.
all the research
Well, I
he
had a
did,
kid,
and
and
then
then
explains
I
why
might be going down to the
And so this is
Navy
what
base
Dick was
over in
reading.
Colorado Springs.
After
Yeah.
reading his article,
I figured if I go down there, what happened
and
is,
he even admitted
the
there was
doctor
some
saw
things
me
that
over there. I went down to the other place over there. Randy went inside. I didn't get out of the car.
changed the
That's
dynamics.
all I did. I got out while I walked around. The guy that was over here, he was acting like he was the
And
head
that
for the
really
police.
opened my
He was
eyes
actually
to
the
how
hospital. He turned around. He looked
corrupt
at me.
that was.
He spun
That
around.
really sold me.
He
on
looked at
the
me
fact
again.
that
He
the
spun
election
around the other way. He looked at
wasn't
me again and said, "Oh my gosh, he's pregnant." That's something else. I mean, they're screwing with the pregnant
What
lady.
I was thinking in my head was like, I want to
I mean,
bring
what
all
could be
these
better
people
than you're gonna slap
in
him
my
in the face?
life
And
under
I
one
just
roof,
decided to let it go. I
and
thought
I
it was
want
gonna
them to be
go.
able to read and use
When we
source
move and
that,
buy a
like,
house,
the,
I'm
you
gonna
know,
hang that piece of
Trump,
paper.
MAGA, bro.
What are you
Trust,
doing?
and
Do you
then
realize I'm a
left
federal
wing,
marshal?
No.
bro, will trust.
Get
Hey,
down.
do you realize I'm a federal marshal?
Story.
Are you?
I'm a federal marshal. I'm actually
He
collecting
was a
federal
reporter
marshal.
before this.
Okay.
Yeah, he was a
Okay,
reporter,
whatever, dude.
worked for
Look it
Huffington
up.
Post, a couple of other
You
places.
can look all that stuff up. It's all
And
there.
he told me that he's always been the type of person that's brought together
Well, that was
people
from you.
from different
This is
backgrounds in his
bodyguard.
personal life. Maybe they don't
But
agree.
anyway,
And he's often mediated between those people.
what's gonna
But
happen
really,
when
the
they do it
inspiration
out to
for
somebody
Tangle
that
came out
kicks
of his
out?
own news consumption.
The idea for
I
Tangle
haven't been
basically
in that
came
hospital over
from
there. It was
the
very
Trump
You haven't heard
era
any of the neighbors
of,
missing the
like,
cat,
Trump proposes a border wall.
because I was just
And
talking
I'm
a few
like,
days ago, and it's
he's
just
like
a total
proposing a
love.
2,000-mile border wall. Sounds totally insane. I can't imagine the best argument for this,
She's very.
but I really want to
Is it
understand.
a she or he?
Is this something that
It's
would
a she.
actually
It's a she.
But it-
and
it-
Very
in order to
domesticated.
Yeah, she
grasp
came with a collar.
what was actually happening, my day would be like, I'm gonna go read the
Yeah, I
New York
was
Times
really
editorial.
upset about that.
I'm
From
gonna
the
read their
beginning, I was
immigration
really pissed
reporting
off.
about it. Then I'm gonna go to Fox
You know,
News
folks,
and
believe me
you know,
about my
scroll through their
status,
opinion
go ahead
page
and
and
look at the
search for
record.
Trump's border wall. And then maybe I'll listen
far
to
as the
Ben
hospital
Shapiro
goes,
podcast, and then I'll go listen to
I really
Pod
don't
Save
care.
America,
I don't trust
and
him
then I'll watch the
That
Daily
guy
Show, do a
was
bit of it,
telling
or
me
watch
that
John Oliver,
unisex can't
and
be
then I'll spend like an hour on
Yeah,
some
he was
Tucker
upset
Carlson
about it.
special about it,
He did not
and then
know
I'll
what happened
do
to
like
him,
10
because
hours
he
of all
didn't
this
want to be in
consuming
trouble.
news, and
So he turned
I'll sit
around
down and I'll
and
be
made
like,
up a
okay, I
story
think I now
that said
have a
stuff
really
that I should
good
address. I
understanding
haven't
of
threatened anybody.
everybody's perspective,
If
positive
anything,
and
I'll help
negative
people
about this
out.
policy proposal.
That's a bunch of
Why
bullcrap.
can't I
Like,
just
it's
find
really
out
not
one
like that.
place? That should exist somewhere.
Yeah, they.
Do you know who's reading the
Huh?
newsletter?
I said that.
I
Yeah,
kind of
they
do it
got it
based
just
on a
passed.
reader survey of Tangle subscribers.
If I walk
So a
through
little
there
bit
and they
over
arrest
half
me,
of the
I'll
subscribers are men, around 57%. It skews very white, just below 90% of readers. It's US-based, but Isaac says it does reach something like 55 other countries. And about a third of the readers say that they're on the left, a third on the right, and the last third are either center or independent. Wow, so pretty evenly politically split.
We were in California
Pretty even split politically.
They
And I did talk to some other readers of the newsletter who said that it had an impact on them, similar to Dick and Emily. I met this one guy at like a political event in New York, and he told me it's basically the only news that he reads. I talked to a new reader, Tangle, a journalist actually, and he said that there were some arguments from the right that he'd just written off. But reading Tangle actually helped him see that they had a point. And I even spoke to another guy who liked Dick, had his mind changed about the 2020 election.
Really good point. Especially when you look at me and turn it out like that. Yeah, it's still baby though. I wasn't sure when I had my last miscarriage. I think it was July.
Rick and Dick.
Okay.
So,
Both Richard, if you want to be technical about it.
Got it. Go on.
It's a really similar story to Dick and Emily's. Rick was a big Trump supporter, voted for him twice. Rick's son is on the left politically. They were arguing about the news of Iowa. And the son started forwarding Rick the news letter, including issues that were about the stolen election claims.
Anyway, I gotta go see Grandma. But, y'all stay warm.
Oh, yeah.
Tell her I said hi. Thanks. I actually thought you guys were
Like
going to
Dick
keep
and
me out
Emily,
here.
Rick and his son
No.
mended
Why
their
would I keep
relationship
you out?
and talk to each other.
I know.
And
But
now he
it's
doesn't
like
think the election
one of
was
those
stolen.
things.
And that feeling
Sit
of being
there and
lied
think,
to,
oh, by the way,
it's actually convinced him not to vote for Trump this year.
Really?
Yeah, the only reason I went and voted for him because he made me look foolish in front of my son.
You know, Zach, you mentioned the importance of striking the right tone when we're presenting evidence, especially evidence that's like contrary to what someone believes. And that does seem important, but also just hearing the story of Rick and his son alongside the story of Dick and Emily, his wife, like I do just wonder, does a person have to be motivated to get along with someone they love, to repair a relationship essentially, in order to change their mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. Wanting to see something from someone else's perspective, the perspective of someone you love, it seems like that doesn't hurt.
You know, it's interesting thinking about it. It's not exactly that Tangle moved both of them towards the center and they met in the middle, but it moved Dick more towards Emily, basically.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it would make for a better story if they each moved toward the center. I think that's sort of
Met in the middle.
what we want from a story like this, exactly, met in the middle. But it's really more like Dick believed something that wasn't true, and then he was the one that moved toward facts.
How does Emily say it changed her? Like, does she say it changed her?
So she told me that she didn't have as dramatic a change as Dick. It wasn't like she believed something that wasn't true and had her mind changed. But she says she does read the news differently now. For instance, she told me that hearing some of Kamala Harris's policy proposals and how before she would have taken some of them at face value as good ideas. Now she says she's thinking more critically about them.
How are they doing these days?
Yeah, the last time I spoke to them, they really did seem to be in a better place. I think on the surface, it seemed like their problem was that they've been talking across this political divide. But their real problem was that they weren't agreeing on facts. They weren't agreeing on what was true. That's what made it so bitter.
It's a huge relief. Dick and I can now agree on more or disagree based on the same information at least.
I don't feel like I'm walking on eggshells if I want to mention something to her. I mean, she's her own person. I'm not going to tell her who to vote for. And she wouldn't listen to me anyway.
Now we're on the same hymn book, more or less. Although he might be reading a different page than me at the time, but it's generally the same hymn book.
But I mean, agreeing on the same set of facts, being in the same book, that's only going to get you so far.
Who's Dick voting for?
You know, as far as I'm concerned, I don't like Trump as a person. The way he handles himself, the things he says, it bothers me a lot. But the one thing that I did like about him was his policies. And so I'm definitely leaning towards Trump.
Okay, that's Dick.
That's my take.
That's the first time that he verbalized to me that he's thinking about voting for Trump. My heart just stopped.
Emily and Dick Newton in Orange County, California.
So that's Brian Reed and Zach St. Louis, the podcast Question Everything, which is produced by KCRW and Placement Theory. The story was edited by Jonathan Goldstein and Robin Simeon. Coming up, other couples muddling their way through this election using slightly more extreme tactics. It's in a minute from Chicago Public Radio when our program continues. news. Before Cheeseman was a popular Denver park, it was a cemetery, a largely neglected cemetery for outlaws, the poor, and the diseased. But by 1890, as the neighborhood around it grew, residents wanted something more pleasant. First, the dead had to be moved. After loved ones claimed some, 5,000 other bodies remained. An undertaker hired to move them turned out to be unscrupulous. He crammed corpses, sometimes more than one, into cheaper child-sized coffins. The city fired but did not replace him, and work on the park proceeded, above and around the remaining graves. When that process was completed, the family of Denver pioneer Walter Cheeseman donated the Greek neoclassical marble pavilion that still anchors the park that bears his name. It's the backdrop for many a photograph, wedding, and ghost story. Because every now and then, a body or two is unearthed. A reminder of Cheeseman Park's origin. A Colorado postcard from CPR.
Check out the new Member Center, a new tool designed exclusively for managing your membership. It's a one-stop shop for updates and more. Get your account set up today. Start on the support page at cpr.org.
Here at Radio Lab, we go places. Driving in
Leave a story about
in
being a marshal.
in my closet.
Radio Lab, Saturdays at noon on KRCC and CPR News.
This is American Life from Ira Glass. Today's program, a small thing that gives me a tiny shred of hope. Okay, so it was Act 1 in the Tangle newsletter that inspired that name for today's episode. Now, in the second half of the show, the thread from that story that we're going to pick up and keep pulling is what is happening with couples during this election. Which is interesting because, as you probably heard, there's a real gender gap between men and women this time out. Men prefer Trump by 8 percentage points. Women for Harris by 9. With that, we turn to Act 2 of our show, Act 2, Till Death Do Us Partisan. Okay, so if you remember Emily and Dick, who we heard in Act 1, they talk openly between them about their political differences. One of our producers, Aviva de Kornfeld, spoke with a woman
What are
who's
you
taking
doing?
a different tactic with her husband.
There's it in here for you.
It's been hard to find a time to talk with June. She's on a 3-week road trip with her husband, and they have almost no time apart. So we looked for little cracks in our schedule to sneak in a call. Do you have a sense of how much time we have right now?
Only about half an hour. I'm in the shower.
Okay. Wow, half an hour. Long shower. Luxurious.
I'm lucky that everything, juice and everything.
Yeah.
It's like a teenage girl now.
Okay. Do you mind if I record this call?
I don't mind, but I'm a little bit,
He kind of looked a little concerned. I said, if I really want to cause trouble, I'll just go ahead and take this to the White House.
The trouble June's trying to avoid
They ain't gonna like it
is an
very much.
argument with her husband. They're both conservatives, but after voting Republican for her entire life, this election, June will be secretly voting for Kamala Harris. Her husband doesn't know about her plans.
So I really just, that's sort of why I'm a secret voter, is because
Sorry, but I had to get that off my chest.
but having the conversations about it is where things, get just uncomfortable.
While we talk, June is pacing around
It's good
the
to know,
backyard
though.
of their rental
What?
house, where her husband can't
That
hear her.
they,
It's not like
is
she's
known.
scared of him. She just doesn't want to fight with him.
the whole
which is why we're
trespass
using a
thing.
pseudonym. June's not her
I don't really
real name.
care. If I walk down there and they arrest
The
me,
Harris
I
campaign
ain't staying in
is
jail.
counting on the idea that
I'll
there
file-
are lots of Junes out there. They're marketing to these women, specifically
Sorry, but it just pisses me
sending
off.
Republicans like Liz Cheney all over the country to talk to them. And there's a whole grassroots effort of people sticking post-it notes in public restrooms, reminding these women their vote is private. I wondered what it was like for people in this situation. Is it really possible to keep a secret like this from the person you share a house and a life with? How do you do that? What are the consequences? On our call, June made a point to say it wasn't always this way. She's been with her husband, who I'll call Rick, for 20 years now. They first met in an online group for single parents. June had 3 little kids from a previous, pretty rough marriage.
I might be joining
Rick had 2
Homeland
kids,
Security.
And their courtship started over the phone.
Yeah, I mean, like being in middle school, like you'd spend all day with your best friend in middle school and then immediately come home and get on the phone with her. We would just
Look at all those
talk
blackbirds.
for hours and hours and hours.
it just felt like the easiest, most natural connection.
By the time June and Rick actually met in real life a few months later, they were basically already a couple. A year later, they got married, and Rick raised June's kids as his own, calls them his kids. June says Rick was totally apolitical when they met, had never voted, wasn't even registered, which did not sit right with June. She's always been very
That just upsets me to
It's
no
a real
end.
effort to vote in every election, not just the big ones.
The only thing that they ever
Since
put on
June
me,
was a lifelong Republican,
and
Rick
it's false.
also registered as a Republican.
Fuck you
And in
guys.
2016, they both voted for Donald Trump together. But June immediately regretted it. She never liked Trump, but it felt
He thinks
wrong
I'm
for
a
her not to
compulsive
vote,
liar.
and she assumed he wouldn't